welcome back to the TVBinges.com Pilot Roundtable, a Southgate Media Group podcast. I'm Kyle Tremblay, the editor of TVBinges.com, and I'm joined as always by a fellow TV Binges writer. She's out in the field gathering stones for her slingshot. It's Olivia Richards! Hello!
Hey, thank God I made it back in time.
Thank God indeed. Because today we are talking about ABC's new, biblical drama. It's Of Kings and Prophets. Olivia, what did you think?
I'm not sure what happened, at all in the episode. I was live tweeting along with it last night, and I kind of felt like I walked into a really bizarre Game of Thrones Bible, crossover fan fiction, one of those ones that you accidentally find at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And it's so bizarre that you can't stop reading it, but, you really want to, but, you can't stop because it's kind of such an amazing train wreck.
I am fascinated that you live tweeted this. Were there other people tweeting with you?
There were, surprisingly. I thought I was the one person probably watching it, but other things were happening.
Well, we're gonna get to the ratings later, and spoiler alert, you were the one person watching it. So
surprised. I think it was me and 2 other people.
Yeah.
So for all the 3 people who were watching,
were other people I mean, Twitter's really good about people not being super critical of shows and kind of just being excited about what they're watching. Were the other people generally excited about this show? Were they did they know the character names? Did they know the names of Saul's daughters?
Nope.
No? Okay, well, but
that's being really optimistic. I'm pretty sure we were all in the same boat where everyone's what just happened?
Okay.
What's still happening?
Yeah,
what's going on?
Because I remember tweeting Wicked City, I think it was, and there were some people who were yeah, I'm into it. This guy is mysterious and dangerous, and I'm this is the worst show I've ever seen. but I mean, Twitter, every show has 1 or 2 people who might like it. Every show appeals to someone, but boy, oh boy, am I at a loss at who this would appeal to. I am really at a loss with this one. Holy cow. Speaking of holy, so what did you think? What did you think about? Well, I guess I should establish the premise of this show, of Kings and Prophets, is to talk about kings and prophets.
Defined premise. You're one of the strong ones.
Yes, the titular king is Saul, the biblical Saul, first king of Israel, and the prophet in question is Samuel. I guess the king, the other soon-to-be king is David, of course, of David and Goliath fame and of King David fame. This is basically a dramatization of the book of Samuel of the Bible. I don't know. This is maybe too broad-ranging of a question for a podcast, but Olivia, your relationship with the Bible, just in surface-level terms, where are you at? Maybe do you go see did you go see Exodus in the theaters? Where are you with the Bible in pop culture? Maybe is a better way to phrase it.
I think definitely in pop culture, because obviously there's the Bible.
Yeah, right.
Raised in a church environment, so that's separate. But then when you actually bring it into pop culture. I haven't seen Exodus. Obviously, and it's kind of hard to say because, obviously when you have a dramatization of what's in the Bible, you get a very watered down version that's sort of really, really loosely based on any kind of historical context or any kind of socio-political context that's actually in, the Bible itself. So I'm not super familiar. I think I saw one part of the Passion of the Christ a while ago. So.
Well, if you saw one part of that movie, I feel you kind of know where that one's going.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no spoiler alert for Passion of the Christ. But are you someone who when there's a biblical movie or TV show, does that give you you said you were raised in a church environment, and I'll get into my own sort of history with this in a second. But is there any are you inclined to see it at all? Or is it just sort of you're kind of indifferent towards that?
It depends on how it's being shot. I think there were 2, or actually really one really amazing movie that took the dramatization of biblical events and kind of really tied it into something that's really applicable. And that was actually a cartoon from DreamWorks called The Prince of Egypt.
Oh, I haven't
And I
seen
think that's the one that actually did a really, really good job because it appealed to a very broad audience and it kind of took the broader themes
it. Mhm.
of, the teachings of the Bible and brought it into, the characters that we are all very familiar with. But then I think I'm seeing this new trend in pop culture where they kind of want like the story of, something like, David and Goliath or, some other aspect of the Bible, and they kind of turn it into a very bizarre Game of Thrones kind of like very bizarre like war type environment, and they just focus on sort of the sex and violence, but it's like the Bible, and it's a very kind of strange thing that's now kind of happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Game of Thrones karaoke, where you've sort of taken the story beats of Game of Thrones and the idea that everyone speaks in an English accent, which
For
I
some
I
reason.
couldn't get past that. By the way, Israel is in the Middle East, and no one the English accent wasn't invented at this point in history. like even, no matter what your thoughts of the Bible are, this is clearly portraying a period in real history. Like this is not a fantasy world. Like England wasn't a country at this point. This is not people should not be speaking in English accents. And I mean they obviously shouldn't be speaking English, but I mean it's network television, you can kind of forgive that. But the English accent is really weird here.
I
And
know. I think they had one guy who kind of briefly came in and was speaking in kind of a vaguely watered down Middle Eastern
yeah,
accent. He was like the one person.
right, right. Yeah, everyone's very white. I mean, it looks like Game of Thrones, and everyone sounds like Game of Thrones, and there's a lot of talk of strategy and of like supply shipments and of war games. Like it's very like by the book. It's a coloring book version of Game of Thrones, but as you noted, it's borrowed the characters from the Bible. And I also wanted to comment on something you said about themes regarding the Prince of Egypt and how that took biblical themes, as you said, and applied it to a different setting. What this show doesn't even have a passing interest in is the themes of the Bible. Like
No.
there's like first of all, like God is mentioned I think twice in this 44-minute pilot, which is interesting. But I can kind of get behind an interpretation of this from the perspective of maybe a commoner or of David, honestly, who at this point is just a shepherd. Like where maybe he's obviously the prophet Samuel is the one interacting directly with God, and maybe the people here are not having like direct interaction with God. This isn't like Moses' time where they're being guided by a light. This is a period where the prophet is the one interacting with God. So I can understand why God wasn't like especially present in this pilot if that's what they wanted to do. But certainly the themes of the Bible are not like sex and violence and like a like basically a Game of Thrones, like in the literal sense,
Yeah.
like going for power. Like there's obviously like power struggles and there are scenes in the Bible, but it's that's not the point of the Bible. You're entirely missing the theme here, and that's kind of hard to get behind when you just take sort of pluck characters out of the Bible and put them in a completely different context, and devoid of any sort of meaning or significance. And so this is probably a good point to mention that to sort of out myself in internet terms as like a church going person who reads the Bible regularly and who is almost exactly, I mean, literally exactly the kind of person that this show should appeal to. Because what they're going for, I can understand the sort of initial thought behind this show, which is that a lot of people go see these really low budget Christian movies. These sort of like not the Left Behind movies like those Kirk Cameron ones, but like
Oh God.
the ones that yeah, I know my reaction.
Literally.
Yes, but the sort of the one about the professor from a couple years ago that was in a school setting, like these sort of they make the movies for like $5 million and they always take in like 20 million at the box office, and like there's definitely a sizable market for like Christian based movies. And then there's also this whole like Game of Thrones phenomenon. And so what they're trying to hit is both of these big audiences. But the problem is the Christian audience that goes and sees Left Behind movies and other movies has absolutely no taste for the sex and violence that is featured very prominently in this pilot. Like that's an instant turnoff for that entire segment of the population. They're not going to sit around with their families and watch a show that has like graphic sex scenes in it.
No.
And then the Game of Thrones audience generally has no interest in the Bible. They don't want to hear about David. Like, they don't, this is not an audience that is sitting there like, oh yeah, like, I want to watch David slay Goliath. Like, this is an audience that wants to watch Jon Snow slay the White Walkers. Like, this is a fantasy audience. It's not a historical audience. And so the Venn diagram of those two audiences overlaps in a very small place, but I happen to be in that overlap where I am both interested in Bible stories and a huge like Game of Thrones nerd, and yet I found this show like offensively bad on both fronts. Like this is it to me, like someone interested in both things that this show is drawing from. It is so like unfaithful to the biblical narrative that calling it like a Bible show is basically offensive. Like this is a show that has absolutely no understanding or interest in what the Bible is about. And then as a Game of Thrones fan, the characters are so blandly drawn. The sex and violence, even though it is quite common, is also like it's on ABC. So it's like we're not talking like HBO levels here. So it's all like watered down. So like it misses on both accounts, and I feel like as someone who the show is directly targeted for, I actually probably liked it less than someone who was just in one camp or the other. So that's my take.
No, I completely agree because I'm like, well, with Game of Thrones, like you have fictional characters.
Right.
So, you know what, like you have room to grow and develop and have a little bit more of a direction to go with how you choose to utilize them. But like, I'm sorry, but if you have, something that's kind of already been written and you decide that you're like, oh no, just kidding, there are no ways to modernize this story. And it's like, it's weird because it's supposed to be a historical representation. So they don't even really have to do that much modernizing in the first place. And there's plenty of like really cool, like, kind of socio-political themes in the Bible that you can draw off of. But I felt like they just kind of glossed over it and they're like, blah, 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 this is boring. We need some more sex and murder.
Yes.
Let's do that. And it's like really bizarre to watch.
It's very strange. And on the subject of characters, so they're taking these historical characters, at least historical in the biblical narrative. I understand we don't need to get into semantics about that. But the thing is, like, King David is a really like interesting figure because he is the author of most of the Psalms. He is someone who is portrayed in the Bible as very sort of artsy and very almost a whimsical kind of character. Like he was often singing and dancing. There's a scene where he's like dancing around naked in the Bible. Like he's a very sort of free spirit kind of dude. And in this show, like this pilot, David is portrayed as just like a Jon Snow kind of dour hero. Like he is like blandly courageous and heroic. And it's like if you're sort of bound by this historical narrative, you've got a potentially really interesting and different central figure here, and they just punt on that and make him a generic like run-of-the-mill hero character, which is so like infuriating to me, not because it's sort of inaccurate to the Bible, but it's like we need an interesting character here. Like what this show is so desperately crying out is something to latch onto. Because yeah, you just watch this pilot and it just goes by and you don't pick up any of the character names and no one is doing anything interesting and it's just a lot of sort of manufactured intrigue. And you need some like performance or some a character who speaks differently and who behaves differently. And David, according to the Bible, actually was that person, and they just decided to like just gloss over all that and turn him into Jon Snow. And that to me is what's frustrating here. And like King Saul, for example, was like kind of a madman who was prone to like fits of mania and did like really like insane things. And here he's basically Robert Baratheon. Like he almost looks exactly like King Robert Baratheon from Game of Thrones. And he's behaving like Robert Baratheon. Like he's a boorish, sort of impulsive dude who is kind of bumbling and past his prime. And it's like Saul was selected to be king because he was like tall and handsome And it's like, so what I'm saying is, I'm not like punishing it for not being like biblically accurate. It's like the Bible version of these people are way more interesting than the version who appeared in this pilot, and that is inexcusable. Like the very least you can do is either match or be more interesting than your source material. Like it's right there. Like they could have just lifted it directly and done something interesting with these characters, and instead it's just like this bland, glossy, big pool of nothing for the hour.
That's exactly what it is. And I just like I had like a moment of just like I had to like stop myself from laughing because they basically have, you know, David talking about how he, you know, planned to, I forget, like something about how he plans to take down Goliath. And he's like, oh, I have my slingshot. And it's like this like sour, like kind of moody 30-year-old man in a field of sheep, like talking about how he's going to use a slingshot. And I'm like, this is very
Right.
strange because I'm like, I really would have liked to see them cast David younger, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
you have very like sullen, angry, like, you know, moody 30-year-old shepherd.
You're absolutely right. I didn't even. Yeah,
Shot.
because everyone should be younger in this show. By the way, David should have been like 16 in this
Yeah.
show, and Saul should be like 30, 35 maybe. Like Saul should be a handsome and popular king. And David should be like a kid who is a shepherd. Like that's and that's not, again, it's not an accuracy issue. It's that the story is more interesting that way. Like we don't need 30-year-old David being sullen and playing
No.
playing
I
this
think they're
stupid
trying for
thing.
like sex symbol, but I'm like, that doesn't make any sense in this
No.
context at all.
Yeah, he needs to be like a kid. He needs to be like played by like a 18, 20-year-old actor who's like an up and comer and played a lot more whimsically and just, you know, as like a sort of interesting figure. And boy, no one on this show isn't, no one, even like Samuel is like, appears in like one scene in this pilot, the prophet Samuel, who of course wrote the book that this is based on, and is like, is just like this weird, like sort of mysterious figure who doesn't seem like particularly noble, or and it's like you don't have a strong sense of what he represents or anything. Like he's not like speaking with the authority of God a lot of the time. He's just sort of speaking. I don't know. It's this weird, like unguided attempt to interpret something that honestly, like, even if you're not like a religious person at all, the book of Samuel is way more interesting than whatever this was. Like this was just like bland and lifeless basically and didn't really have any kind of purpose. So
I completely agree. And I mean, by the time I think, you know, the first scene where they had the women on screen and they all look like they stepped out of a Victoria's Secret,
oh
I'm like, how? How?
yeah.
Like, I get so frustrated when you have, you know, like a historical drama and it's like the women are like fully made up. Like, they look like they just spent like 3 hours in tools with their hair. And I'm just like, this is insane. Like,
Yeah.
just what is happening right now?
Oh yeah, I mean the female characters in this are clearly, because I mean the Bible, this at this point of the Old Testament, women aren't playing the most prominent of roles in all the narratives, so they sort of invented these characters and sort of assigned them just sort of generic personalities, and went from there, and it goes about as you would predict it goes. Like it's not great, you know.
No.
So yeah, so this premiere did a 0.8 rating in the demo
Oh, good lord.
with 3.32 million total viewers for a Tuesday night network premiere. By comparison, the aforementioned Wicked City, which was canceled after 3 episodes, did a zero point 0.9 in the demo. So this is premiering lower than Wicked City, which was a like hilariously low premiere. So the Venn diagram is clearly not overlapping much, and no one liked it or watched it. Olivia, is this one going to be canceled quickly, make it through the season, or renewed for next season?
Oh my god, it's gonna be canceled quickly.
This one might not make it to episode 2. This is what, if this was canceled by the time this podcast is posted, I would not be surprised. This show is such an enormous miss no one again it's so hilarious, like they're obviously trying to get that like Bible audience, but you can't have like sex scenes and get the Bible audience. Like you're not you just fundamentally can't. Like you're not that entire like family audience you're losing when you have David like running off with the king's daughter. Like that's not, you're not gonna get it. It's impossible to get that audience. So yikes, what a miss.
Swing and a miss.
Swing and a miss. Your final verdict, Olivia. Thumbs up or thumbs down on Of Kings and Prophets?
Oh, I am slingshotting my thumbs down. Big thumbs down.
Yeah, this my thumb's going down faster than Goliath will in a few episodes.
Yo.
This is a this is a contender for worst pilot. And like the thing is, like, it never got to be like interesting in a bad way. Like, you know, we hand out our unintentional comedy awards. There isn't like really unintentional comedy here. It's just like so bland and generic that no one is doing anything interesting enough to be unintentionally funny. There's no like Juliette Lewis here who's giving like such a hilariously awful performance that we can laugh at it. Like this, everyone is doing the exact same sort of Game of Thrones commoner impression, and it's like, oh, there's nothing here. I mean, there is nothing here.
Total flatline.
Total flatline. So that's a thumbs down. You've been listening to the Pilot Roundtable, a TVBinges.com and Southgate Media Group production. You can listen to all of our episodes on iTunes, where you can rate and review us. We'd appreciate that. Or find us at SouthgateMediaGroup.com. Follow Olivia on Twitter at RichardsOlivia and me on Twitter at KyleLovesTV. Until next time.